What's up, guys? Welcome to KP Community. Garrett, we're back. Hey, intro. What's the Jimmy Herget intro? Perfect. Excellent. Getting creative. Might have to move and change our intro. Excited for tonight. We got a bunch of stuff coming. Really cool segment tonight from Reeves. Inside the metrics, we've got a under the hood. I'm going to jump into our T3 philosophy tonight. And we've got an AMA tonight as well. We'll get some feedback. Hold on a second. Let's go. No more volume there. Beautiful. All right. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Call the IT department. That's like Matt, maybe?
Yep.
Inside jokes. All right. Let's jump into tonight. Tonight we got on Community number 1. Garrett, welcome back. Anything for the community tonight? Anything you got to say?
I'll be back for a while until December. We might have a special guest on in December.
We got a few coming through. I'm pretty excited about. So shout out Dr. Mike Sohn giving us the news today he's gonna be in town. Maybe a special cameo. Some of our pro guys getting back into town finally. A couple of guys starting up this week, which has been great. Maybe bring those guys on too for a couple episodes. So awesome. Well, let's jump in tonight. Before we get started, we're gonna do something we haven't done before. Get my notes out real quick to make sure that I read this appropriately. Excited about it.
What's going on, but yeah, sure.
Give me 2 seconds. We're gonna jump in. We got a few sponsors, so excited. We've got a couple guys that have been, following us, and a few people that reached out. So really excited about dropping a few sponsors. One of which we're more than accustomed to. The other of which really excited to be a part of in December. As we know, it is critical to further our education as coaches. To continue education, it is important to have deep relationships with other leading coaches and leaders in the baseball industry. That's why Connecting the Dots Baseball Conference was created. The CTD goal is to ensure meaningful one-on-one conversations with industry leaders. This conference goes beyond the presentation and connects both your further knowledge with an industry-leading network. Join CTD on December 3rd through the 5th in Knoxville, Tennessee. For more information on CTD, visit ctdbconference.com, where you can learn more about the conference, see the speaker list, and of course, buy tickets. Have you ever wanted a deeper understanding of your mechanics? For years, to fully get objective information on biomechanics, you had to visit a biomechanics lab. This process was clunky. Markers, a cold lab, expensive lab equipment. It was a process that either many couldn't experience or didn't enjoy. Good news though. Today, you can get objective data on your mechanics right from the palm of your hand. No more awkward or expensive lab, just you and your phone. ProPlay AI presents to you Pitch AI. Pitch AI is groundbreaking technology bringing the lab-accurate data right to the palm of your hand daily. Never has understanding how to improve your mechanics been so easy. Just capture, review, and repeat. Perfect your training anywhere, anytime with Pitch AI. Check out Pitch AI today at proplayai.com. Let's jump into tonight. Excited about the Inside the Metrics tonight with Reeves. Pretty stoked to start putting together the next segments here. Reeves is jumping in tonight on release height. Garrett, what do you think your changeup release height is?
Oh, it's low. It's like negative.
I
can get it to negative. I'm usually at like 0 or negative.
It's definitely really low. Maybe once we get into checking out our TrackMan data. Shout out TrackMan.
What's my shoulder?
Yeah, we'll
feeling ready. I'll throw some 24s.
We'll jump in there. Sounds good. Well, let's roll it tonight. We're going to Inside the Metrics. Let's check it out with Reed.
A lot of our guys ask us about arm slot. In reality, there's 2 aspects to arm slot that I want to go over today. At ball release, we have our release height as well as our horizontal release point. Today I want to go over more into the release height aspect of the pitch. So by definition, our release height is the vertical distance of the ball above home plate when that pitcher releases the ball. This is usually reported in feet or in meters. In the early 2000s, we started to see teams starting to take some of these kind of over-the-top slides and emphasizing some of that high spin rate. In more recent years, teams like the Rays have started to utilize pitchers that kind of have varying slots, especially out of the bullpen. So more so emphasizing the difference in slot pitcher to pitcher rather than just emphasizing one slot in general that might be better than the others. So how does this release height metric relate back to you? So in recent years, we're starting to see teams prioritize using more of those outliers, so different slots, more so than just diving back into those over-the-top, super high spin rate guys. So we don't have to necessarily throw 100 coming out of the bullpen to be effective. We can be kind of those outliers in those different slots to be funky, to be a little bit off that average. So all in all, uniqueness is our friend here. So for you at home, you're working on trying to improve your metrics, trying to get better when you're throwing those bullpens on your Rapsodo or your TrackMan. Go back, look at your release height, do some comparative analysis on your own, and see how you can become a little bit more of an outlier, or see who you can compare to into the big leagues. So I hope this has been effective in helping you guys understand that release height metric a little bit better. Leave us any questions there at support@KineticPro, Reeves at KineticPro. I'm here to help you guys get better. Casey, Garrett, back to you guys in the studio.
All right, bringing it back. Reeves killing it. Release height. So I think that's super interesting what he's talking about. You know, he's talking about how baseball's really changed. You know, we've valued for so long, high spin in baseball. I remember when I was going out of high school, looking at the draft. You know, it was like funny. I was such a high slot guy, and that was so valued because everybody assumed, 2010, 2013, we really kind of had that first, pitch FX era in 2008, where guys started really valuing high spin. And it was funny, I look back, I didn't understand why people were interested in my slot or, the way I moved. But now looking back, they were correlating that to higher swing and miss. And in today's game, it's not to downplay velocity and the importance of velocity, I think. But it's more to explain and encourage that, if you're an outlier, period, okay, velocity is important. But if you're an outlier, period, teams are going to value you. And that's really happening across the scale in baseball today. You really see it uniquely with the Rays. Man, their bullpens are just stacked with guys across the spectrum, as we saw in that video. So, shout out Reeves, awesome work as always. Looking forward to the next Inside the Metrics. I know Reeves has got a couple of them keyed up here. Excited to bring that to you and drop some new information on how you can understand these metrics. So look, at the end of the day, we have TrackMan, we have Rapsodo, we have all these tools. But it's important for us to, even with like Pro Play AI, it's important for us to really hone in and understand what we're looking at. If we can't define it, we can't use it, right? So if we can't define it, we can't use it because it's not going to give us the ability to actually go in and determine how we make change. The same thing applies in the weight room. It's no different. If we start utilizing VBT units for just no reason, just because they sound cool, right? We saw it on Instagram, or we use a machine, or we use a certain exercise with no context. It's really the same thing. It's no different. So, shout out Reeves there for another Inside the Metrics. And we're going to move on tonight to our next one, which is Under the Hood. And I'm going to do a lot of talking. Co-host, I got comfortable last week. I just talked away. So
That's fine.
Tonight's another pitching night. We're going to go. We gave Garrett a strength conditioning night in, I think, episode 3, maybe 2.
2 or 3.
Yeah, it was like an all strength conditioning night. So I'm running pitching stuff, man. You were gone. I took over. So let's jump into the Under the Hood here. Take in our next segment. Excited to talk tonight. We're going to talk on our T3 philosophy. You used to have like a hand gesture. Remember? It was like
the dodgeball is like T3. T3.
Yeah, never caught on.
Never caught on. It was all the is of me and all them thing, but it's okay. It caught on with us, but
it's not. No, I'm letting it go. We're gonna let that one go. I'm just gonna disappear into the ether. Moving on. So tonight, Under the Hood, we're talking about our T3 philosophy. And Garrett, you've heard me give this speech a million times over. In 2018, right about the time that Garrett was coming on board, I kind of sat down and wanted to map out what makes up arm health. What makes how do we define arm health? And I think for so long we've looked at, coaches would say, they'd make this statement, right? They'd say, if you don't fix your mechanics, you're going to end up with an arm injury. Yeah. Like you're going to end up hurting yourself. Reality, though, is that when we start talking about injuries, it's not necessarily mechanics. It's multiple pieces coming into one piece. So I came up with this graphic, this triangular approach, right? So number one thing that we're looking at is workload management. Okay, that's going to be the peak of our triangle. That's number one. Okay, number two is going to be strength. And the third thing most relevant to injury prevention is going to be mechanics. Now, I want to preface this and say we don't have the information to prevent injuries, like truly prevent injuries, but mitigating injuries, right? That's where we're at. We're trying to figure out how to mitigate injuries. Workload management's number one. Again, strength's number two, mechanics are number three. Not to say that mechanics aren't important, because they're extremely important. They're just not number one. And so I think a lot of times guys get confused on this and they don't really understand. They say, oh, well, if I throw this way, I'm going to have higher torque or higher stress on my arm. And the way that, first off, it takes understanding a deeper dive into understanding how torque or how stress is calculated when we actually look at a biomechanics report or look at information coming from our sleeve, etc. So the way this is happening, one is that number one, you have a lever length, right? So an arm length, okay? And we're looking at how fast that's moving. We're looking at the positioning of that segment in space. And all that information is coming together to give us an idea of what exactly is happening, right? So if I have a longer arm, right? I have a longer arm and it's moving faster, okay? And it's also further away, it's going to produce more torque, right? If I have a shorter arm, lesser of an angle, right? And I'm moving slower, it's going to be less torque, okay? So body type means something, okay? Speed of the arm means something. So intensity means something. Also, how quickly we get to elbow extension, how quickly our elbow extends also means something, okay? So when we look at this, we start to evaluate workload, okay? We have to start to understand that workload, it's never a single throw that causes the injury. It's the accumulation of those throws over time that end up causing the injury, right? So mechanics, if I have a high stress, right? A guy like Chris Sale, great example, okay? A guy like Chris Sale goes to elbow extension earlier because he throws from a lower slot rather than, let's say, a Rollis Chapman who's more over the top, right? Chris Sale also skinnier. Throws roughly 100 miles an hour in many cases, 95 to 100, right? I think we'd all take Chris Sale's career, okay? There's no reason for us to go grossly change our mechanics to fit a model because Chris Sale throws low 3/4, right? Like there's no reason for Chris Sale to change his mechanics just because he's a higher stress guy. He has to manage that stress, right? So going back to my point, it's never a single throws incidence. It's multiple throws over time that cause fatigue that end up with an injury, right? You talk about in the strength and conditioning space, it's really kind of no different, right? When load exceeds
tissue tolerance.
Beautiful. Killing it, right? So when load exceeds tissue tolerance, we end up with an injury, right? So it's the same thing in the weight room. If the load's too great for our tissue to be able to handle it, we end up with an injury, okay? So it's no different in throwing. We look at it the same way. So how do we manage that load? That's what we're really after. How do we manage that load? Well, that comes down to workload management. So again, workload management, number one, okay? Mechanics are number three. In the middle, we have strength. And strength, if we build up that strength level, we're able to mitigate injury. Because at the end of the day, and I like to use this as the example, I'm definitely more out of shape today than I was 5 years ago, right? Garrett's watched me squat, and it's okay. I'll just leave it at that. It gives me a hard time about it. So today, though, my ability to do things, if let's say I rolled an ankle doing something, okay? My body 5 years ago would maybe bounce out of that. And be like, hey, I'm fine, no big deal. The body's ability to stabilize and protect that joint was a lot greater than it is today because my body doesn't have quite that strength to overcome that load. So in this case, the more strength, the more we're able to mitigate that load or handle a higher load before that ability starts to before we start to get injured. So when we look at it, we say workload, strength, and mechanics. Garrett, do you have anything to add to the strength side of it?
Just from a strength side, that it basically gives us more of a buffer space where if we do go a little bit over our workload, that we're not going to be in a fatigue state where we could see an injury pop up. That's basically from the strength, just being able to build the capacities of the body up to handle those loads. So you can be on the field longer. The more time you're on the field practicing your skill, the probably better you're going to be at your skill at the end of the day.
Exactly right. So that's arm health. We talk about it. Workload, strength, and then mechanics. We have to keep those in line. We have to objectively value those things, right? So now we're going to talk about performance next. So how do we become better performers? How do we end up gaining ball velocity? People walk through our door. I joke all the time. They come in through our door. They're asking for one of two things. How do I stay healthy or how do I throw harder? Typically what everybody asks me, okay? So if we're talking about performance, how do I evaluate performance in this T3 philosophy? Well, we're going to flip the triangle, okay? We're going to put mechanics first and foremost, okay? If you can't move, if you can't transfer that energy that you're creating, that force that you're creating up the chain, then at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to produce that ball velocity. So mechanics are number one for me there. Number two is strength, okay? And number three is workload. And workload still has relevance in this case, because if I'm exhausted all the time, I'm not managing how much I'm doing in terms of my load, chances are it's going to affect my mechanics. I'm going to ultimately end up put myself in a bad place. And then this other triangle of health comes into play and I potentially end up getting hurt. So to perform at our best, we have to be at our best. Everybody knows, like, hey, general rule of thumb, mom and dad used to tell us when we were kids, right? Like, hey, get a good night's sleep before you go and play. It's the same thing here. Nothing changes. It's a matter of us managing that load. But first and foremost on the performance side, mechanics. How well can you move? Okay, number two, strength. How well am I able to build myself up? How much force am I able to produce? Number three, in this case, it's workload management. How willing am I to be at my best today? How am I able to manage that? So these three pieces, we can measure them, right? In our case, we measure them at our facility. Most of the time, we're looking at, from the workload component, we're looking at a sleeve, we're looking at data, trying to track that workload data. Even from a band standpoint, we track our testing scores with our guys. We auto-regulate that and help guys understand what to do in terms of bands on a daily basis. From a strength component, it's a little more complex, but in our case, we like to use our band score. We like to use other things like our assessment, EUR scores, and different types of measurements of force output for each day or for each assessment that we do. And then lastly, when we're talking about mechanics, we're using ProPlay AI as our assessment tool to evaluate. So again, shout out ProPlay. We're using ProPlay AI as our assessment tool to look deeper into the biomechanics of how a guy moves. We're comparing those pieces from an assessment component to the biomechanics component and trying to get a good, clean picture of how do we help this guy stay healthy or how do we help him gain velocity. So that's more of a foolproof approach. I think that's, we can take this. There's so many more buckets in these things, but as a gist, if you're looking at arm health and you're either saying, man, I need to get healthy, or two, you're looking at saying, I need to evaluate my program as a coach to figure out how I'm going to make our guys better. I think this is a great place to start. This is a great place to start to learn or try to figure out, how am I objectively valuing these three pieces? How am I programming around these three pieces to create the very best for our players? So that is our T3 philosophy. Garrett, anything to add on that one?
One thing I do like about that philosophy is that it changes through which reference point you talk about. You talk about the arm health, how workload is number one, then strength and mechanics. But then if you change the reference point, it doesn't change the model. It just flips the model slightly where it's like, okay, now mechanics top, strength, and workload. I think a lot of models that are out there, they're set on one reference point, but like we just talked about how you go from one reference point to another, they might change the model. And a lot of people are so stuck in their way of a certain model that the best part about the T3 model is that it can change based on the reference point, because we have those three components that we believe that are the top three.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going back to the objective component of it, right? There's so many subjective ideas of how to do this, but at the end of the day, the true objective with technology we have in the game today, I mean, it's there for us to be able to take this model, and it's only going to get better. Take this model and grow it. And workload isn't just throwing, by the way. Like, workload's more than just throwing. We oftentimes look at workload management as just the throwing component. It's deeper than that. It's sleep, it's stress, it's on and on and on. Trying to figure out how do we manage the overall workload of what we're putting as a workload on the athlete in a day. Oftentimes we reference it as throwing, but it's not to get confused with what workload management actually is as a whole, which is this kind of holistic approach to looking at the big picture of our training. So that is under the hood for the night. Pretty solid, like that one of my favorites. All right. Moving on, we're going to go to our next one, which is our AMA. So, Garrett, I know you have a question on there. We're going to let Garrett talk because I've done all my talking tonight already for pitching. So, Garrett, jumping into the strength and conditioning side of it, I know there's a question this week. What do we got for AMA?
Yeah, so Anonymous, the question is, what is stress workload? Not from a throwing side, but from a lifting side. And I'm thinking the guy that's asking is probably talking about what is it? how do we look at it, and then how do we ultimately mitigate that or progress that workload over time. So I'll try to go through each of those 3 points.
Perfect.
So let's identify what workload is. There's a lot of ways you can go about workload in the weight room. The most general term is tonnage, which is just sets, reps times load. This is going to be the overall load that the athlete gets under. This can be from any type of exercises, deadlifts, squats, lunges, landmine press, anything like that. We can look at that as our main quantitative thing. But then we can also look at VBT from a velocity standpoint and looking at the velocities of the bar, not just the load. Tonnage only takes the load into aspect, where having VBT or having a unit there that tracks velocity, we can have another layer onto that exercise, which helps us really pinpoint how we manage that workload. And that's why we use it on those exercises such as the deadlift and the squat, because those, as you've heard in the past, those are expression of strength exercises. So that's what we're assessing if the program we're on is progressing through the building of exercises into the expression. So those are 2 ways, load and then velocity as well. And then when we look at managing that, it's more of a progression of exercises and stimulus in that. It's not so much, oh, just because the load went down, we can technically go lower in load, but technically be higher workload or higher stress value depending on where we place the load. Tempo in that, sets, reps, where we could technically reduce the load, but the stress of that training session could be higher. So that's where it takes a little bit more pinpoint accuracy, where it's like, okay, we got to know torque of the joints, and it's not just, oh, hey, just put more weight on the bar. There's things that most guys don't notice, that a lot of nuances of an exercise that we might go reduce load, but it might be a harder exercise. And in the time, a lot of our guys, it's funny because a lot of our guys, when we do change those exercises for a certain reason, they're like, oh, this is super easy. Then the next day, they're like, dude, I am like dying right now. And it's like, I told you to go light for a reason. And they don't believe me in the moment. But the next day or the day after that, they're like, wow, I'm so glad like you actually like told me to go light. And that's really how you manage it, through quantitative and then ultimately subjective as well. But 2 of the 3 things that we're looking at are objective, with 1/3 of that stress management is going to be subjective. And that's where the importance of having a good coach on hand is really going to be where it's at, where that subjective part, it's important. It's only 1/3 of it, but that can ultimately help progress or regress you in a certain manner, in a little bit more efficient path to the deadlift, where now we can have that quantitative data where it's, okay, we know the bar's moving at 0.75 meters per second at 300 pounds, but now you're at 0.9. And I think that's where it really goes into managing that stress from that weight room.
The mad scientist, everybody, the mad scientist. Yeah. No, look, the thing that I really like that you and I talk about a lot is we laugh at how many guys want to feel like they're doing more. They want to lift heavy, right? We hear this term a lot, like, oh, I want to, like, man, I don't know. I feel like there's times where I want to lift heavier. I want to lift heavy. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does lifting heavy mean, right? Like, because you are lifting heavy. It's just the idea is that you're not pushing yourself to a fatigue state to feel like you're doing more than what you're capable of. Like, you're pushing yourself to what you're capable of, because VBT says, hey, like, you're going to go to this load today. You're going to go to this speed today. This is what we're doing. But in terms of, and you can't break that threshold. Like, you're not able to go past it. But then you tell me, oh, I don't feel like I'm lifting. Well, yeah, you're not lifting heavy because you can't reach your numbers. Yeah. Like, there's a reason we're trying to train the way we're trying to train. I think it's just a misconception of guys, especially younger guys, watching Instagram, right? Like, watching guys deadlift 600 pounds in the off season and going, oh, well, if that guy does it, I should do it too. And it's not like, you have to realize you're in a different place, number one. Number two, that what that guy is doing doesn't necessarily make it right just because he does it. He's a great athlete. Like, that's a way it's a way to perceive this and understand that you're on a path. You got to trust that path. But it's not about feeling like you're doing more. It's about actually seeing progress in time amongst the metrics, amongst the goals that you're setting. We talked about stepping forward a couple weeks ago. It's the same thing we keep coming back to. It's the same mantra, the same message, right? You gotta be objective. You gotta understand. You gotta have goals. If you don't have goals in this thing, if you don't know what you're aiming for, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're gonna go to your feelings.
Yep.
When we go to our feelings, we're in a really bad place in the training environment because our feelings are fleeting. They're gonna go good, bad, indifferent. We're gonna be gone. We're gonna be fatigued, or we're not gonna do enough. We're not actually gonna change, or we're gonna change too much. That's basically the gist of it, right? We're gonna end up in this place where we're not gonna be healthy long term. We're not gonna progress the way we want to see performance increase the way we want it to. So
it's the conversation of sensation over stimulation, and
perfect.
When you're training, you're trying to train for adaptation. You're not trying to feel like you're dying every time. And a lot of guys on social media, you see sweating really hard and like dying and on the ground after a training session. It's like, no, especially in the weight room. Like in the weight room, the only reason you're in the weight room is so you can become better on the mound, and that's it. That's the only reason. It shouldn't be to get sore. It shouldn't be to get tired. It shouldn't be anything like that. The only reason you're in the weight room is to build your body's capacity to do what you're supposed to do on the mound for a long time.
Got it. Love it. I got a question that just came in over email here. I'm going to drop this one. Hold on just a second. It says, Casey, we've talked about this before. Wanted to know, what is deload? For the hyphen. It's deload. Not hyphenated.
Well, I can't spell in general, so when I type it on Google Docs,
it made me totally question myself.
It literally just makes it a whole separate word. So
made me totally question myself looking at that. Anyways, all right. So deload. I'm going to jump into that a little bit. I'll have you explain it maybe from the lifting side of it, and you talked about actually parlays a little bit into your last question, which is great. So I'll explain it from the throwing side and how we quantify it from a throwing standpoint. A deload. Most of you guys are coming out of fall right now, which is where this question's coming from. This athlete's leaving the fall season where they were a starter, throwing 3 innings a piece there, and now they're moving into this winter period. And I know they're looking to come back and start training with us again. So they're kind of determining, what do I do from now, where practice has ended, to the time that I step foot at KP, which is like usually December 15th range. How do I go from this time to that time? You're talking about basically a month, and this athlete in particular, I know their coach wanted them to stop throwing, and he's trying to evaluate, well, I don't want to stop, I need to deload. How do I deload? What is a deload? And so, great question. Deload for us, from a sleeve standpoint, when we're measuring and monitoring throwing workload, we're looking at fitness. So we're looking at a value called chronic workload. I talked a little bit about this in some of our other episodes, but basically, if you've been throwing like 3 innings, your chronic workload is probably gonna be roughly, with a general 5-day schedule of throwing, your chronic workload is gonna be roughly in the ballpark of like a 10, 12, 15 chronic workload. So our goal, depending on what our focus is for the next month. So some athletes, I always recommend deloading into a velocity phase. If guys are going to do a velocity phase, this is the perfect time to do it. So you go from, think about like running, right? So if I have running built up to like 10 miles or 20 miles of running, and now I ask you, like, you've been running every week, you've been running 10 or 20 miles, whatever the number is, and then I ask you the following week, hey, I just want you to run 1 mile. You're going to feel like that 1 mile is nothing. You're going to feel like, man, I can absolutely crush this 1 mile, right? So it's the same thing with throwing. If I build up my fitness level to handle 3 innings, right, and max effort for 3 innings, and then I ask you, hey, I want you to do a run and gun format, or I want you to do a plyo velo format of velocity focus, but I'm only going to have you do 8 throws. You just went from throwing 40 throws all out to now 8 throws all out. Your arm's going to feel great, and your output's going to be even better. So that's the perfect time to implement the deload into a velocity phase. So people kind of get confused when I say that. How can you deload and have a velocity phase at the same time? Deload is just referencing the change in requirement of overall load. So when we talk about a throwing program, if we're going from 3 innings and we're consistent in our schedule, our structure, we're going to go from 3 innings once a week to then maybe going 8 throws, peak intensity once a week. That's a big change in chronic workload for us. That's a deload of chronic workload. Now, for those guys that are just building up and going to break down and build up, get ready for spring, it's kind of the same thing. We want to take you down to a level that we know we can build you back up for spring. So we need to know the spring start date and get you there. Our deload is just lowering the overall load of a certain period of time. In our case, we're talking week to week or every 9-day window roughly, depending on what we're talking about from the data. And we're looking at this and we're trying to evaluate this. How does this impact my goals to get where I need to be? But it's reducing the overall required load for you for a week. That's kind of an easy way to think about, what is deloading for an athlete. So changing fitness level. Talk about it maybe from the weight room a little bit. How do you define it? How do you utilize it? Maybe when's a good time for an athlete to implement some deload strategies?
Yeah, so from a weight room standpoint, it's the same thing. We're referencing the overall load of the athlete. There's multiple ways you can do that in the weight room. You can either do that by frequency. So if you're lifting 4 times a week, dropping it back down for that two sessions a week for that single week or 2 weeks. You can also, the way I usually do it is I like to keep the guys on the same schedule because we have our guys coming in on a set schedule, is reducing the sets or reducing the volume more so than the intensity, just because we know that if I did 4 sets of something, 2 sets is going to be less. Where if you always go intensity, even with VBT, there still might be a misconception of like, oh, this felt easy, even though it might, even if we're trying to quantify it with VBT, there might still be a little gray area on intensity. So I always go volume if we're going to keep the same training sessions. And when we look at deloading, it's going to be in conjunction with whatever we're doing from a throwing standpoint. So if early in the off season we have some guys that took off the fall and their throwing was super light, so I wouldn't say that was really a deload. It's just lighter throwing. Same thing, but you're really deloading overall chronic in that time period. So in the weight room, we would want to go more high intensity stuff because we have that extra stress that we can accumulate and then also recover from. But then when we start ramping up throwing wise, that's where it's like, okay, now we've been lifting really hard for 6 to 8 weeks, but now your throwing is getting a lot higher or more high intensity. Now we're going to deload a couple weeks, especially in that velocity phase where even though those 8 throws, you're going all out. That's going to be very high taxing on the athlete's body. So that's good if a velo phase is 2, 4, I don't know.
2 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks.
2 to 4 weeks. So if it's 2 weeks, we can deload somebody from a weightlifting standpoint in those 2 weeks, allow their bodies to recover, which hopefully we have to see some super compensation happen. And that's where we see a run and gun PR somewhere along there that we can see get the most out of that velocity phase, because ultimately, again, the only reason you're lifting is to make yourself better at throwing or pitching. So always looking at the pitching side and then working off of that pitching schedule to see, okay, when can we push? When can we reel in? When do we need to deload? And then deload really happens when we start seeing fatigue either in the weight room from a VBT standpoint or from a velocity standpoint, from a throwing standpoint. And that's where having us two together and Reeves and Matt talking on a weekly basis to understand, like, hey, like, where are these guys at from a week-to-week standpoint?
Yeah, it's a team effort, and I love that. And to correct you, I lift because I want to put it on the gram, but I think our guys in the facility are different, which I understand what you're saying. So I just want to clarify, I'm lifting for the gram. Our guys hopefully not lifting for the gram. We don't allow that anyways, right? I mean, I don't really mind if they. Anyways, moving on. So no, I think you're bringing up a great point, which is, we have to have a collective effort in objective tracking. I think this is the craziest thing in professional baseball. Like, I watch professional organizations and even colleges, like, and I'll use professional organizations because it's more common. You have a pitching coach writing a report. You have an athletic trainer writing a report. You have a strength coach writing a report. You have all 3 writing separate programs. And then you have a coordinator, maybe off in a distant land somewhere, overviewing all of this. Everybody's writing reports, everybody's writing emails on athletes, but nobody's talking to each other in depth to connect these pieces together. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, yeah, I have the initial reports from somebody, the initial assessments when they first came in, but that week-over-week report's not being seen or it's not being communicated. Programs aren't being changed. Well, we're in professional baseball. I thought this was supposed to be the gold standard, right? And it's not a bash against professional baseball. It happens at college level too. It's just to say, like, we as organizations whether it be in the private sector or whether it be in the professional space or whether it be in the college space. We have to do a better job of, number one, objectively determining, going back to our T3 discussion, objectively determining workload management, objectively determining strength, and objectively determining mechanics in guys, and communicating the change and how that impacts guys, because it's a team effort to get those three things to be at their peak. We talk about buckets being full, right? Like, there's oftentimes a guy is struggling mechanically, and the pitching coach is throwing everything he can to get, to put out the fire. Like, hey man, you got to try this, and let's try that drill, let's do this. But reality is, the strength coach just needs to talk to the pitching coach to get on the same page and attack this issue from a physical standpoint to make this throwing standpoint change. But we don't get that. So it's like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand how we haven't gotten there, but you're absolutely right. Like, it comes down to deloads, particular, are a form of this process, a form of an off season, right? A piece of the off season. It's a form of programming. Like, it's a change in programming. And any change in programming, the other pieces of the program have to be notified. Yep. Like, it can't be this one-off thing. And that's why I love, our staff does such a good job of communicating with one another, and red flagging guys and double checking guys and just making sure guys are on top of things. And to be honest with you, I'm sure our athletes at times must be driven crazy by us, because we won't let a guy throw if his stuff isn't put in properly. Like, we're holding groups up from time to time just to make sure that we collect their data appropriately, make sure we cross-reference and ask questions about tournaments and everything else coming up. But it's all for the idea that if we don't do that, we're not going to get anywhere with these athletes. Like, we're going to make a mistake. And from this, I think that's what makes me most excited about the future and what technology brings, is the ability to objectively quantify this stuff. But no, I mean, back to the question of, what is a deload? Well, I think we defined deload pretty well. When should you implement deload? When should you implement a deload? Which was kind of the real question as to why he was asking. That's something that needs to be really strategically planned months in advance, or even at the moment of when you have really good causation as to exactly what's happening here, as to why you should change it. It shouldn't be just like, well, I think I'm gonna do a deload now. Like, I got some time on my hands here. Let's just deload. Why not just take some time? And it's like, well, you're doing that because you want to go to the beach with your friends? Like, that's not a deload. Like, that's not appropriately planning a deload. That's just time off. Like, there's a big difference there. So, anything to add to that, Garrett? Beautiful. Crushed it. Let's move on to the wrap. We'll wrap it up tonight. Tonight's meeting obviously got moved to 8 o'clock. Next week, we're back at 7:30 again. Crushing it at 7:30. Back live again on all of these platforms. It feels like YouTube, Vimeo, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We have links on. I don't think we're live yet there. But we're moving. We're trying to get everything up and live so that you guys can listen and tune in from a distance at any time on any platform that you like. If you're on Instagram, make sure you check out the link tree. You guys can watch these episodes on repeat even after if you miss them. So don't worry about always catching them live. You can catch them afterward. If you hit up YouTube, our YouTube channel is popping right now. I am stoked. So we are moving on YouTube right now. Listen, the title pages. I mean, the title pages excite me. That's what I get, like the art thing to the title. I don't know. It excites me. It looks good. So I get like a joy in my heart when I look at our YouTube page. I see all of our title pages.
It looks good, but it just functions.
It functions. That's true. We have a big argument in the facility over appearance and functionality.
I understand that appearance is important, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't function, it doesn't matter.
I agree completely with the statement. Garrett's idea of functioning versus appearance. Garrett is a much higher function than appearance. I'm a much higher appearance than function at times, but I think we meet in the middle, which is good. So if you guys haven't checked out our YouTube channel already, hop on, check it out. Make sure you subscribe. Subscriber count's going up. Love it. Killing it. Hopefully just bringing great content, great information to you guys. We're really excited about this. I mean, we've been talking for years. I pulled up an old video this week of our first attempt at a YouTube channel or a podcast. And I look back and laugh. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had like, fake microphone and a garage behind me and no volume and all this stuff. Obviously, the channel's changed now. This is years of work kind of coming into the making. And we're really excited to bring you guys all these new episodes, all of these segments. And really, at the end of the day, hopefully it's just something that helps you find that 1%, that one little nugget, that one little thing, puts you over the top, gets you where you need to be in an off season and in season, just a little unlock to get you to perform or maybe help you stay healthy through that process. So with that being said, the wrap tonight, check us out on YouTube, subscribe, hit us up on Instagram. If you don't already follow us, give us a follow. Twitter, I'm popping on Twitter right now. Personal account, I'm just arguing with people, which has been great. So a lot of feistiness on Twitter from the personal account. Our business account's much more professional. It's all of our stuff. So depending on what you guys want to see, if you guys want to see some arguments and some dirty laundry, hit me up personally. If you guys want to see more professional and more of our YouTube account or more of our content from YouTube, etc., hit up KineticPro on Twitter. With that being said, that's the wrap. If you guys want to sign up for an assessment, come into KineticPro this offseason. Check us out online, KineticProBaseball.com. Go into the baseball tab, hit book my assessment. If you guys are coming back, active clients, as always, using our scheduler through the website. And if you guys have questions, always reaching out, support at KineticProBaseball.com. I think with that being said, that's everything. Boom. Sponsors, inside the metrics, under the hood. That's it for tonight. All right, guys. Appreciate the time. Next week, same time, episode 7 coming your way. Later.